I didn't know she existed until they told me she was in danger. And suddenly everything I'd built, my empire, my life, was at risk. What would you do if your past came crashing down, threatening everything you love? Would you fight back? If you've ever wanted to watch a story where betrayal turns into justice, where revenge is sweet, and where a father will stop at nothing to protect his daughter, hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready for a story that'll have you on the edge of your seat. The opulent glow of the skyline outside his penthouse was a stark contrast to the shadows that lingered within Marcus Blackwell's heart. As the CEO of Blackwell Enterprises, one of the most powerful tech conglomerates in the world, he had everything: power, wealth, influence. But his life lacked something irreplaceable: peace. His past, particularly the betrayal he had endured years ago, refused to stay buried. Marcus had long since buried the painful memories of a time when he had been a man hopelessly in love. He had trusted a woman, Jessica Turner, with everything: his heart, his dreams, and most importantly, his secret. A secret that she had kept from him for years. She had promised to stand by him, to share a life built on honesty, but it was the lies that ultimately drove them apart. It was a typical business day when Marcus received a letter that would change everything. It wasn't the kind of communication he usually entertained. There was no business transaction, no proposal, no contract to sign. It was a simple envelope with his name written in bold, unfamiliar handwriting. The letter inside was short, but its contents hit him like a sledgehammer. Your daughter needs you. She's in danger, and only you can save her. The words lingered in his mind like a poisonous whisper. His first instinct was disbelief, quickly followed by anger. Daughter? How could this be possible? Jessica had never told him about a child. But the letter wasn't vague. It came with a set of instructions, a location, and a plea for him to meet the person who had written it. The words felt almost like a challenge, one that stirred something deep within him, something he had not felt in years: hope. As Marcus pondered over the letter, the weight of the past bore down on him. He had left Jessica, believing she had betrayed him. The trust they had built was shattered in an instant. His mind raced back to that fateful night when he had found her with another man, a simple misunderstanding that had led to a catastrophic break. He had walked away not knowing that something had changed in the months that followed. Now the revelation of a child, his child, opened an emotional floodgate he had spent years sealing. The question of how his daughter could have remained a secret even from him gnawed at him relentlessly. But then the dark shadows of doubt crept in. Why hadn't Jessica told me about our daughter? Why didn't I know about her all these years? The more he thought about it, the more he found it hard to accept that Jessica had kept such a significant part of his life hidden from him. The notion of a daughter was both a promise and a threat, a revelation that carried the weight of a future he hadn't even known existed. It was an injustice, a betrayal, or so he thought at the time. But as the days went on, Marcus couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the story behind the letter wasn't as simple as it seemed. This wasn't just about a father and daughter. It was about something bigger, something that would change the course of his life forever. Who was behind this? Why now? And most importantly, was Jessica in danger? With his mind in turmoil and his emotions running high, Marcus made a decision. He couldn't ignore this. He couldn't just walk away and pretend nothing had happened. His daughter, if she truly existed, needed him, and if there was any chance of saving her, he had to face the painful truth. He booked a flight to the location mentioned in the letter, bracing himself for what he might find. What awaited him was more than just an unknown child. It was the key to unraveling a life that had been hidden from him for far too long. The moment Marcus stepped off the private jet, he felt a weight settle over him. The crisp air of the coastal town was different from the sterile, fast-paced environment of his city life. It felt too calm, too quiet, like a place where secrets were buried deep within its sandy shores, never meant to surface. The instructions in the letter led him to an old, weathered house on the outskirts of the town. It seemed out of place. Nestled between the sleek modern buildings that surrounded the area, the house stood alone, its windows dark, as though it had been abandoned for years. But Marcus wasn't here for real estate. He was here for answers. He approached the front door, the creaking wood beneath his boots reminding him that time had been far from kind to this place. He raised his hand to knock, but before he could make contact, the door opened slowly, revealing a man dressed in a dark suit. His face was stern, but his eyes held a hint of recognition, as if he had been expecting Marcus all along. "Mr. Blackwell," the man said, his voice calm yet urgent. "You came." Marcus nodded, not wasting time with pleasantries. "I'm here to see my daughter. Tell me everything." The man stepped aside, motioning for Marcus to enter. Inside, the house was dark, the air heavy with the scent of aged wood and dust. The silence was almost suffocating, broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty space. As they walked through the narrow hallways, Marcus's mind raced. His thoughts kept returning to the letter, the cryptic message that had drawn him here. The man led him to a small room at the back of the house. The dim light flickered above, casting long shadows on the walls. There, sitting at the center of the room, was a young girl. Her face was hidden behind strands of long dark hair, but Marcus could see the faint outline of her features. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. The man stepped forward. "This is your daughter, Marcus." Marcus's breath caught in his throat. The girl didn't look up, her eyes locked on the ground. She was quiet, too quiet. But there was something about her that stirred a deep recognition in him, an unexplainable connection, like an echo of his own soul. He knelt in front of her, trying to make eye contact. "Hey, sweetie," he said, gently, his voice softer than he had intended. "I'm your father." The girl's eyes slowly lifted, her gaze meeting his for the first time. And when she looked at him, something in her eyes triggered a flood of emotions he wasn't prepared for. There was no warmth in her stare, just a deep sadness, a void that made his heart ache. "I know who you are," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus froze. Her words cut deeper than any knife. How could she know him if he hadn't been there for her? How could she have known the man who had never even known she existed? The girl stood up slowly, her movements stiff and cautious. She walked over to a table where a small stack of papers lay. She picked up the top sheet and handed it to Marcus. "My mother told me about you. She said you'd come for me one day." The weight of the paper in Marcus's hands was heavier than he anticipated. It was a birth certificate, his name written clearly on it, the proof of paternity he had never been given. It felt unreal, like a cruel joke. How could Jessica have kept this from him? His mind reeled as he glanced at the paper, his eyes moving over the details that should have been a simple confirmation. Instead, they were a betrayal. "How could she keep this from me?" he asked aloud, his voice trembling with anger. "How could she let me live in ignorance all these years?" The man remained silent, watching the exchange with a neutral expression, but Marcus could see the tension in his posture, the unspoken knowledge that something much darker lay beneath the surface. "She did what she thought was best," the man finally spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "But it wasn't just Jessica who kept this from you. There are other people involved, people who would stop at nothing to keep the truth from you." The room felt colder, the air thick with the weight of these new revelations. Marcus could feel the walls closing in on him, the life he had built, suddenly crumbling beneath the weight of his past. His daughter, this girl who barely acknowledged him, was at the center of something far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. "Who are these people?" Marcus demanded, his tone sharp, his patience thinning. The man stepped forward, his eyes dark with warning. "The ones who made sure you never knew. The ones who want your company, your power. They used Jessica as a pawn, and now they'll stop at nothing to get what they want." The realization hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about a father's missing years. This was about a conspiracy that had been years in the making. The stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. The man's words echoed in his mind as the gravity of the situation settled in. They used Jessica. They used his daughter, and now they were coming for him. The night felt like an endless spiral, pulling Marcus deeper into a world of uncertainty and danger. His mind was a maze of unanswered questions, each one leading him further into a dark abyss. As he left the room with his daughter, the weight of the birth certificate burned in his pocket, a symbol of betrayal that he wasn't ready to confront. The man who had guided him into the house, seemingly an ally, was now a stranger. Every word spoken carried the scent of danger, and Marcus could feel the walls closing in. The girl, his daughter, walked silently beside him, her tiny hand gripping his with a quiet intensity that belied her age. She hadn't said much since their brief interaction, but Marcus could feel her eyes on him, those hollow, sad eyes that seemed to pierce through him. There was so much unspoken between them, and he wondered how much she understood about the world she had been thrust into. The man led them down a narrow hallway, past old wooden doors that creaked with each step. They stopped in front of an imposing wooden door at the end of the hall. The man turned to Marcus. "You need to be prepared," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The people behind this, they will not stop. They have already marked you, and if they get their hands on her—" He trailed off, his eyes flickering to the girl, who was now standing quietly behind Marcus. "Who are they?" Marcus demanded, his patience running thin. "Who are these people, and why are they after us?" The man hesitated for a moment, as if weighing the consequences of revealing too much. Finally, he spoke, his words measured. "They're part of a larger organization. Powerful, untouchable. They've been using Jessica to get to you, and now they want your company, your resources, everything you've built." Marcus's fists clenched at his sides. The familiar fire of anger was rising within him. He had built Blackwell Enterprises from the ground up. It wasn't just a company, it was his legacy, the fruit of his years of sacrifice, and now someone wanted to take it from him, someone who had used his past to manipulate his future. "I'll protect her," Marcus said, his voice cold with resolve. "But I need to know everything. I need to know why Jessica kept this from me and what I'm really up against." The man nodded and opened the door to reveal a small, dimly lit room. It was sparse, the walls bare except for a few filing cabinets. On a small table, there was a stack of papers, the edges worn and faded with age. The man gestured for Marcus to sit. "Jessica was part of something bigger than you or I," the man began. "She didn't have a choice. They threatened her life, and yours. She kept the truth from you to protect your empire. But the truth is that they've been planning this for years." Marcus sat down, feeling the gravity of the situation weighing on him. He had always prided himself on his ability to control every aspect of his life. But now his past and his love, his family, his legacy, was slipping through his fingers like sand. How could he have been so blind? "The people behind this," the man continued, "they've infiltrated your company. They've been using your own employees against you, and Jessica's daughter, your daughter, is the key. They want her to leverage against you. They want you weak, vulnerable. They'll use her to make sure you don't stand in their way." Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. This was no longer just a personal matter. His company, his life's work, was at risk. And the one thing he loved more than anything, his daughter, was now the weapon they would use to destroy him. The man seemed to sense Marcus's anger. "I know this is hard to understand, but you have to trust me. Jessica made the hardest decision of her life, and now you're the only one who can stop this. They'll come for her next. They'll stop at nothing to get to her." Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I won't let that happen. Not to her, not to me." The man didn't flinch. "Good. Then you need to act fast. They've already made their move. You'll need to gather your resources and take control before they do." As the words sank in, Marcus's mind shifted from confusion to strategy. He couldn't allow anyone to take his daughter from him. Not again. But to protect her, he would have to confront a power he had never anticipated. His enemies were everywhere, cloaked in secrecy, infiltrating every corner of his world. He turned to look at his daughter, who stood silently in the doorway, her small figure a reminder of everything he had lost and everything he stood to gain. The girl was his responsibility now, his blood, his flesh. He would do whatever it took to protect her. "We need to go," Marcus said, his voice now steady with resolve. "I'll take her home, and I'll prepare for what's coming. And when the time comes, I'll make sure they regret ever underestimating me." The man nodded, seemingly satisfied with Marcus's response. "Good luck, Mr. Blackwell, but remember, the enemy you're up against isn't just any enemy. They know you, they know your weaknesses, and they'll stop at nothing." Marcus's gaze hardened. "I'm not afraid of them." With those words, he turned and walked out of the room, his daughter by his side. The storm was coming, and he was ready. The drive back to the city was long and silent, the tension between Marcus and his daughter palpable, the weight of everything that had happened, the letter, the sudden revelation, the betrayal, and now the looming threat, made the world outside the car seem distant and unreal. Marcus had dealt with many enemies in his life, but nothing had ever felt quite like this. This wasn't just about power or money. This was personal. This was about his blood, his family. His mind raced, strategizing every possible move. He knew the people behind this would be methodical, cold, and ruthless. If they wanted his company, his daughter, or both, they would stop at nothing. He needed to act quickly. But first, he needed to focus on what mattered most: his daughter's safety. She was sitting in the back seat, her face still expressionless, her gaze fixed on the window. Marcus had tried to talk to her, to make some kind of connection, but she remained distant. He couldn't blame her. She had been thrust into this chaotic world, a world that made no sense to her, and her trust was something he had to earn. The pain of not knowing her, not being there for her all these years, gnawed at him. "Sweetie," Marcus began, his voice soft, trying to bridge the gap. "I know this is all overwhelming, but I need you to trust me. I'm going to make sure no one hurts you. I'll protect you, I promise." She didn't respond immediately, but after a few moments she turned to face him. Her eyes were full of something Marcus couldn't place: fear, sadness, maybe even hope. But there was something more, something that made him realize how much she had been through. "You don't understand," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just them. It's you too. You weren't there. You didn't care." The words hit Marcus like a slap. It wasn't just the anger in her voice, but the deep-seated hurt. He could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him. His own guilt surged through him. How could he have abandoned her like this? How could he have been so blind to the consequences of his actions? "I know," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I wasn't there when I should have been. I made a lot of mistakes, but I'm here now and I'm not going anywhere. I will fix this. I will fix everything." The car fell back into silence, the only sound the hum of the engine as they continued their journey. Marcus's mind was still reeling from the man's words. Jessica made the hardest decision of her life. It was a decision he didn't fully understand, but he was determined to find out everything. Why had Jessica kept his daughter from him? Why had she let him believe the lies? They arrived at his penthouse just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the city. As Marcus stepped out of the car, he looked up at the towering building that represented his empire. For all the power he had amassed, the one thing he had never been able to control was his own heart. And now, with his daughter in the mix, the stakes were higher than ever. Inside, his assistant, Sarah, was waiting for him. She looked up from her desk as he entered, her face instantly falling when she saw the grim expression on his face. "Mr. Blackwell," she said cautiously, standing up. I didn't expect you back so soon." Marcus didn't respond right away. He couldn't afford the luxury of explaining everything to her, not yet. He had bigger problems to deal with. "I need you to secure the building," he said, his voice firm. I don't know how, but we need to make sure no one gets in, not without me knowing. Is that clear? Sarah nodded without hesitation. Of course, sir. I'll make the arrangements. Good, Marcus said. He turned to his daughter, who was standing quietly beside him, observing everything with a mixture of caution and curiosity. I need you to stay in here for now. No one is allowed to come near you. Do you understand? She nodded, though her face still held the same sadness from before. Marcus made his way to his office, the door sliding open automatically as he approached. The sleek, modern space seemed colder than usual, the sterile environment a reflection of the emotional void he felt. The city lights flickered outside the window, a stark reminder of the battle that was brewing on the horizon. He sat at his desk, his fingers drumming against the surface as he sifted through the details of the situation. The truth was, he didn't have all the pieces yet. The man who had led him to his daughter had given him just enough to realize that things were much bigger than a simple family betrayal. The people behind this, the ones who had manipulated Jessica and used his daughter as a pawn, were part of something far more dangerous. As Marcus delved deeper into his thoughts, his phone buzzed. It was a private number, unfamiliar, but it was no surprise when he saw who it was. His heart skipped a beat as he answered. Marcus, a familiar voice said, low and menacing, "We know you're with her now. You're making a mistake, and we'll make sure you regret it." The voice on the other end was cold, the kind of voice that came from someone who had no qualms about using violence to get what they wanted. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, trying to maintain control of the conversation. "What do you want with my daughter?" The man's laugh was dark, almost predatory. "You really don't get it, do you? It's not about her, it's about you, Marcus. You have something we want, and we'll do whatever it takes to get it." The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone, his knuckles white as he gripped it. He knew the stakes now. This wasn't just about a daughter he had never known. This was about a war for everything he had built. He took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. They had underestimated him before, and now he would make them pay for it. Marcus was no stranger to threats, but this felt different. The voice on the other end of the phone wasn't just a cold call from some random adversary. It was a warning, a challenge. His life had been filled with competitors trying to outmaneuver him in business, but this was personal, and it was coming for him with the full force of everything he held dear. He stared out the window of his office, the city sprawling beneath him, its lights flickering like 1,000 secrets waiting to be revealed. He had built this empire from the ground up, a tower of ambition, sweat, and intelligence, yet it seemed so fragile now. One phone call, one revelation, and everything was on the brink of collapse. He could feel the weight of his daughter's presence in the next room, her safety now the most important thing in his world. But in order to protect her, he needed to know who these people were and what they wanted. They had already demonstrated how far they were willing to go. They wouldn't hesitate to make good on their threats. But Marcus wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not ever. He reached for his laptop, quickly tapping into his private server. The man on the phone had mentioned something that didn't sit right with him. "It's not about her. It's about you." Those words kept echoing in his mind. What did they want from him? What was it about him that made him a target aside from his wealth and influence? His fingers flew across the keys, searching through public and private records, looking for any link that might connect the enemies he was up against. He dove deeper into the backgrounds of his employees, his board members, and his competitors. But it wasn't until he started looking into Jessica's past that something clicked. Jessica had been careful about what she kept hidden. After all, she had been living a quiet life away from the limelight, keeping their daughter away from his world. But now the pieces were falling into place. There were too many unanswered questions about her history, things that didn't add up. Why had she kept the pregnancy a secret? Why had she not reached out to him? Then he found it, a small obscure detail buried in one of her old files, a series of transactions that didn't make sense, and an address he'd never heard of. It was linked to an offshore account, a shell corporation with connections to some of the most powerful and dangerous figures in the world. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. The pieces were finally coming together. Jessica hadn't just been hiding their daughter from him. She had been hiding something much larger, something far more dangerous. She had been involved with people who were not just after money or power, but control. And they had been using her to get closer to him all along. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. They've been using Jessica as a pawn to infiltrate my life, my company. Marcus slammed his fist against the desk, frustration and anger building within him. His whole life had been a series of calculated moves, but this was a game he had never prepared for. He needed to act fast. He couldn't let them get the upper hand, and he certainly couldn't risk his daughter's safety any longer. He needed information, and he needed it now. Marcus picked up the phone again, this time dialing a number he hadn't called in years. The line rang, and after a few moments, a familiar voice answered. "Blackwell," the voice said, calm and measured, yet holding an undertone of caution. "I need your help," Marcus said, cutting straight to the point. "I'm in danger, and my daughter's life is on the line. I need everything you can find on Jessica Turner. I need to know who she's been dealing with, and who's been pulling the strings behind the scenes." There was a pause on the other end of the line before the voice responded. "You're asking for a lot, Marcus. This isn't something I can do lightly. If you're sure about this, I'll help. But know that once you step into this world, there's no turning back." "I'm not backing down," Marcus replied firmly. "Get me what I need." The line went dead and Marcus exhaled slowly. He had just crossed a line that once crossed had no return. But there was no turning back now. He wasn't just fighting for his company. He was fighting for his daughter, for his family, for everything he had lost and everything he still had left to protect. Later that night, as Marcus sat in his penthouse with a glass of scotch in hand, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his contact, the person who had promised to dig into Jessica's past. The message was brief but chilling. "They've been laundering money through your company. They've been using your own resources to get closer to you." Marcus stared at the screen, his mind spinning with the implications of the revelation. His company, his life's work, was being used against him. His enemies had infiltrated everything, from his business to his personal life. But there was one thing they didn't know. They didn't know Marcus Blackwell as well as they thought. They did. They had underestimated him before, and now they were going to pay the price. The morning after the revelation, Marcus woke up with a clear and urgent mission. He had gathered all the intel he needed. Jessica had been a key player in something far bigger than he had realized. The web of deceit surrounding her and the powerful organization that had used her to get closer to him was more extensive than he could have imagined. But despite the shock, there was a clarity in his mind now. He knew what had to be done, but even with all the evidence in front of him, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that gnawed at him. Jessica hadn't just kept their daughter from him. She had been playing a dangerous game with people who were ready to destroy everything he had worked for. Yet, as the sun rose over the city, Marcus couldn't help but wonder if Jessica had done it all for one reason: to protect him, to protect their daughter. Could it be that her actions were driven by a love and loyalty he had never seen? Or was it all a web of lies, a carefully constructed story designed to manipulate him? The questions haunted him as he stood in front of his penthouse window, gazing out at the bustling city below. The world had always seemed so simple when it was just about business, just about power. But now, everything felt complicated. The lines between right and wrong, truth and lies had blurred, and he didn't know who he could trust anymore. But one thing was certain: the battle had only just begun. The people who had orchestrated this, the people who had manipulated Jessica and now were using his daughter as leverage, would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Marcus had to prepare for war. His first move was to tighten security. The building had been under constant surveillance, and with the information he had gathered, He knew he couldn't afford to take any chances. Marcus called in his most trusted security team, the ones who had always been a step ahead. He instructed them to lock down every entrance, monitor every corner, and ensure no one got in or out without his say-so. His daughter's life was on the line, and he wasn't going to let anyone get close. Next, he called a private meeting with his top advisors. They had been loyal to him, and now more than ever he needed their support. The stakes had changed. It wasn't just about the future of Blackwell Enterprises anymore. It was about survival. As they gathered in the conference room, Marcus noticed the concerned looks on their faces. His usually composed demeanor had given way to something darker. The tension in the room was palpable. His team had seen him face crises before, but this felt different. This was personal. "Here's what we know," Marcus began, his voice steady, but firm. "Jessica Turner wasn't just hiding our daughter from me. She was involved with an organization that has been using my company to further their own interests. We've been infiltrated, and they've been using my resources to get closer to me. This isn't just about money, it's about control. They want everything. Blackwell Enterprises, my legacy, and now they want my daughter." The room was silent as his team absorbed the magnitude of the situation. His chief security officer, Thomas, spoke first. "We'll need to go dark. Shut down any external communications. We can't let them trace anything back to us. And we'll need to track every movement, every transaction. They're using our own systems against us." "Agreed," Marcus said, his gaze hardening. "I want all of you working together on this. No more secrets, no more lies. We fight back now, and we fight dirty." But as his team began to strategize, Marcus's thoughts returned to his daughter, the girl who had appeared out of nowhere, with nothing but fear and distrust in her eyes. She was the center of everything now, the reason they were fighting. But Marcus had failed her just as he had failed Jessica. The guilt still lingered, and though he masked it with determination, it weighed heavily on him. He was her father now. He had to be the protector she needed. That night, Marcus stayed in his penthouse, surrounded by his team, planning his next move. He would go after the organization behind everything. He would take them down piece by piece. The idea of revenge burned hot in his chest. For years he had let his business ambitions dictate his actions, but now his priorities had shifted. This was about something more, something worth fighting for. As he walked through the darkened hallways of his penthouse, he was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was his daughter. "Can I come in?" Her voice was soft, but there was a sense of hesitation in her words. Marcus had been so focused on the plans, so consumed by the war ahead, that he had almost forgotten about her. She had been quietly observing everything, but this was the first time she had come to him on her own. "Of course," Marcus said, stepping aside. She entered the room, her small frame almost lost in the vast space of the penthouse. She looked up at him, her eyes still filled with that sadness he hadn't been able to erase. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to be the reason you're fighting." Marcus's heart twisted. He knelt in front of her, bringing her gaze to meet his. "Sweetie, you're not the reason I'm fighting. You're the reason I'm living now. You're the most important thing in my life. And I promise you, I will protect you, no matter—" "What?" She didn't respond immediately, but he could see the tiny flicker of trust in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As Marcus wrapped his arms around her, he felt a renewed sense of determination. The battle ahead would be brutal, but he would fight with everything he had, for his daughter, for Jessica, and for the future they still had left. The days following the meeting with his team were a blur of strategy, surveillance, and high-stakes moves. Marcus had prepared for every possible outcome, but as the web of deceit around him continued to unravel, he realized just how much he had underestimated the people he was up against. These weren't just faceless corporate rivals. They were shadowy figures who operated in the deepest corners of power, willing to sacrifice anything to maintain their control. Every step he took seemed to lead him deeper into a labyrinth of lies. As he confronted his enemies, they didn't fight fair. They went after his company's weakest points, manipulating board members, leaking false information to the press, and trying to cripple his business through covert attacks. It wasn't just the money or the power they wanted. It was his legacy, his entire existence that they aimed to destroy. But Marcus wasn't going to let that happen. Not again. He sat in the war room of his penthouse, staring at the map of his company's infrastructure on the large screen before him. Each red dot marked a potential threat, a point of vulnerability. Every part of his empire was under attack. He felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His empire, his family, his daughter, everything was at risk. And then, the phone call came, the one he had been anticipating, the one that would signal the final showdown. Marcus, the voice on the other end, was smooth, calculated, almost familiar. "It's time to end this. You've been a thorn in our side for too long. Let's finish this once and for all." The voice belonged to the leader of the organization, the puppet master who had orchestrated everything, the one who had used Jessica, who had used his daughter to get closer to him, the one who had been pulling the strings from the very beginning. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but laced with a dangerous edge. "Why are you doing this?" The leader laughed softly, almost mockingly. "You've always been a step behind, haven't you? You think this is about your company, about your daughter. It's not. It's about control. You had the power, Marcus. You had everything, and we were simply reclaiming what was ours." Marcus's grip on the phone tightened. "You think you can just take it all from me? My company, my family." "You're gravely mistaken." The voice on the other end was unfazed. "We've already taken it, Marcus. You're just too blind to see it. But if you want to keep your company, your daughter, you know what you need to do. Surrender. Walk away. Let go of everything." Marcus's eyes flickered to the photograph on his desk, the one of him and Jessica before everything had gone wrong, before the betrayal, before the lies. He could still remember the love he had once felt for her, the promise they had made to each other. But those promises had been shattered, and now the truth was his only ally. "I'll never give up," Marcus said, his voice steely with resolve. "I'll fight to the end. You've underestimated me, and that will be your downfall." The line went silent for a moment before the leader spoke again, his voice dripping with venom. "Very well, Marcus. You'll have your war, but know this. It's not just you we're after now, it's everything. And you'll see how far we'll go to make you pay." The call ended abruptly, and Marcus sat there in the silence of his office, his heart racing. The time for games was over. He wasn't just protecting his empire or his daughter anymore. He was fighting for his life. He gathered his team and prepared for the final strike. His enemies had been ruthless in their pursuit of power, but they had no idea what they were up against. Marcus Blackwell was no longer the man they had once underestimated. He had been reborn through the fires of betrayal, through the pain of loss, and through the fierce love for his daughter that had transformed him into something unstoppable. As the hours passed, the tension in the air grew thick. The final battle was imminent, and there would be no turning back. Marcus had one last card to play, one final move that would destroy everything his enemies had worked for. He called in his most trusted ally, a hacker who had once worked for Blackwell Enterprises, but had since disappeared into the shadows. Together they had developed a plan, a way to bring down the organization from within. Using the vulnerabilities in their systems, they would turn their own weapons against them. The plan was risky, but Marcus had no choice. It was the only way to win. That night, the final phase of the operation began. Marcus watched the screens in his office as his team launched their cyber attack, using every resource at their disposal to infiltrate the enemy's systems. It was a race against time, a fight between David and Goliath with everything on the line. Minutes turned to hours, but finally the screen flashed. The enemy's systems were crashing one by one. Their entire network was collapsing under the weight of their own greed. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that victory was within reach. And then The message came through, clear and direct. The leader is exposed. They've lost everything. Marcus felt a rush of triumph. The battle was over. The organization was dismantled, and with it, the threat to his daughter was finally eliminated. His empire was safe, and his legacy, his future, was secure. But, more than that, he had won something more precious than all the wealth in the world. He had won back his family. He turned to his daughter, who had been quietly watching the entire operation unfold. She looked at him with wide eyes, a mixture of fear and awe in her gaze. But there was something else there now, a glimmer of trust. "I told you I'd protect you," Marcus said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "You're safe now, and I'll never let anyone take you from me again." She ran into his arms, and for the first time since this nightmare had begun, Marcus felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. The battle had been long and the price had been high, but in the end, love had won,